Hey everybody, it's Wes with Fundamental Games, here to teach you a little bit about Dungeon Makers. This is a strategic tile laying game of dungeon building for 2 players. And even though it has a light fantasy thematic visual to it, it is not a dungeon crawler, it is not a combat game, it's not a player versus player fight for all. This is a true strategy game where you're drafting tiles and trying to build a dungeon that is better than your opponent's, is really the gist of the game. But let's talk about it in a few different segments. This segment is going to be about the tiles themselves, because as you build your dungeon, you're going to be building it using a series of tiles. And each of those tiles has kind of a tile type and an ability. So there's tunnels, chambers, mazes, water, puzzles, chasms for your tile types, plus of course your starter tile, which is treated as a tunnel. So tunnel types, tile types. We'll start with tunnels. So tunnels have a T on them, and they have a slight brown tint to them. And tunnels don't give you any points when they're played, but they do allow your minions or your meeples to move around your dungeon a little bit more freely. So tunnel tiles don't give you any points when they're played, but they do always have an icon, which I'll talk about in a different video, and they allow your meeple to move through your dungeon additional steps, which is going to accrue you extra points. So that's what tunnel tiles do. All right, next tile type we have is a chamber tile. So chamber tile doesn't give you points when it's played, but at the end of the game, if you do happen to have one of your meeples on a chamber tile, at the end of the game, you'll get an extra point. Otherwise, they're not worth any points on their own, but they do always have an icon, and icons are always worth points in some way, shape, or form. So that is chamber tiles. Next up we have maze tiles. They have the letter M. So a maze tile gives you 1 point when it's put into your dungeon. And if you ever move it in your dungeon, so if I use a move action and rotate it or move it over here or down here, I also get a point for it. And at the end of the game, if you have a meeple on it, it also gives you points. So it gives you multifaceted points. It's useful in many ways. And maze tiles are treated as tunnel tiles for moving minions, and that's why they're tinted brown as well. So that is the maze tiles. Next up we have the water tiles. It's labeled with an X because maze tiles have an M. Water tiles give you a point when you put it into your dungeon, and if you already have one in your dungeon, then if you play another one, you get more points. So if I play a second maze tile in my dungeon, I get 2 points. If I play a third maze tile in my dungeon, I get 3 points. So the more water you accrue in your dungeon, the more dangerous it is, and it gives you more points as they're played down. They're not worth any points at the end of the game, so you may want to remove them by the time the game comes close to an end. Next we have a puzzle tile. They have the letter P. Puzzle tiles give you 2 points as soon as they're placed, but they also give you a bonus point if they are adjacent to another puzzle tile. So if I had this puzzle tile in place, I would get 3 points for placing that one, 2 for the puzzle tile, and 1 for being adjacent. If I happen to have another puzzle tile up here, and it does have to be connected, so let's say, see if we can find a good example here. Let's say I had it like that for some reason. Maybe this is how my dungeon was set up. So if I were to do play that, I would get 3 points or 4 points, 2 for that, and then 1 for each of those. I would have had to have this connected somehow too. But you kind of see what I mean. Adjacencies give puzzle tiles points, and puzzle tiles also get points when you move them. So if I were to move this using an action, I would get an extra point for moving my puzzle tile around. And then finally, the last tile type is a chasm. So a chasm doesn't give you any points when it's played, but you're allowed to put it anywhere in your dungeon. So if my dungeon were like this and I really wanted to get some free paths open up, I could put it here even though it doesn't connect, as long as it's adjacent. And now I'm allowed to connect over here. So it's like a wild tile. There's only 2 in the box or in the game. And at the end of the game, it's worth a point for every pathway that does connect to it. So even though you can play it against a non-path, you get extra points for adjacencies to paths. So if at the end of the game my dungeon was connected like that, I would get 3 points for that chasm tile. So that is chasms. And those are all the tile types. So on the next video, I will talk about the icon types. So we'll talk to you then.